Gospel is written in the 6th chapter of St. John, beginning at the 35th verse. Jesus said to the crowd, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Then the Jews began to complain about him because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." They were saying, "Is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can we now say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" Jesus answered them, "Do not complain among yourselves. No one can come to me unless drawn by the Father who sent me. And I will raise that person up on the last day. It is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except the one who is from God. He has seen the Father. Very truly, I tell you, whoever believes in me has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, and they died. This is the bread that comes down from heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. And the bread that I give for the life of the world is my flesh." Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. The lesson for today's sermon is from 2 weeks ago. I've not been in the pulpit for 2 weeks because we had the Young People's Day, and last week I was gone. But there were a couple of texts, and the one that I would like to use for the sermon this morning, again, is from 2 weeks. It is the Old Testament lesson, and it is a story I think that you all are familiar with. It is a story of David and Bathsheba. I will not read that to you, but I will relate again the story in some depth when I get to that point, or I need to. I was driving down. I can't recall exactly the day or actually the year, but it was recently, not too long ago. One of the cars started having a grill that looked like it was smiling. I came down the road and I saw this car, and I don't know what it was that struck me with that particular car, but it looked like it had a human characteristic. It was smiling at me. It was happy to see me. And so I started looking at cars more intently at the front when I saw them, and I realized that there were others that had slinty eyes, menacing. They looked like they were angry cars. And when I looked at exactly the car that they were the muscle cars. They were aggressive. Then I thought about when I first took my son to movies. There was a group of movies made by the Walt Disney Studios about a Volkswagen named Herbie. It was a Volkswagen Bud, and it had all kinds of human characteristics. It could think, it could obey orders, it could be given directions, and it would follow the directions. Herbie became very, very human. And my son insisted that we went to the toy store, that we had to buy a Herbie, and he began to talk to it. Now, I think I read in some news magazine that 50% of the people who have cars name their cars. I know my brother does. It's Little Red. As a matter of fact, when I talk to my brother, he talks more about Little Red than he does his grandchildren, or his children, or even his wife. Little Red is very much a part of his life. Now, also, I read an article that said people are starting to bond with their cars. A great deal of their identity is wrapped in the cars, and they like to see a car as a reflection of themselves. Isn't that wild? The PGA golf tournament is on this weekend, and one of the things you might notice if you watch that is the professionals have taken to talking to their golf balls. You can see them as they hit one, they'll say, over a little to the left, or a little to the right, or stop. Come, stop. Of course, the golf ball is an inanimate object and can't respond. But nevertheless, more and more pros are seeing this as something they can talk to, that they can get directions to, and they'll obey them. Increasingly, people are giving human qualities to non-human objects. Also, it is said that they fall in love with these objects. Betty Zach has written an article called The Strangest Things That People Love. He talks about, for instance, Eileen Eiffel, who fell in love in 2004 with the Eiffel Tower. This structure, of course, she had to give up her romance with the Berlin Wall, but it seemed like an easy sacrifice to make. While most relationships have roller coaster rides, Amy Wolf fell in love with a roller coaster at the age of 13. She fell in love with a roller coaster at 1001 Nights at a theme park in Germany. And she travels 150 miles 10 times a year to spend a full week on a roller coaster. And then more bizarre than anything else, Val Thoreau flies from Canada, England every year because she's fallen in love with a huge oak tree in England. And she spends a week sitting by its side, talking to it, and keeps in touch with it all year long on Google Earth. We think that there might be a danger in thinking of objects as people. The psychologists tell us that people are feeling more and more disconnected with each other. And it is more common now than any time in history that people identify with objects. Okay, so where are we going from here? It's kind of silly to talk about objects as having human characteristics. But the real problem in life that we have is that we treat humans as objects. It is dangerous to think of objects as human, but it's even more dangerous and real sacrilegious to think of people as objects. And that's the lesson we get from the story of Samson and Delilah. If you don't remember it or you never heard of it, let me recount it for you. David is the great king of Israel. David has put Israel in the greatest position it has ever been as a country. It states in the Bible that David is the apple of God's eye. Now it is an early spring, and Israel has gone to war with the Amorites. Tradition has it that the king is supposed to be out there with his troops, leading the army. But David has decided to stay home. It's a little too threatening for him to go to war. So he abdicates his one real duty as a king, to be a leader of the army, and stays home. On a particular afternoon, he has taken his afternoon nap, waiting for some kind of results from the front where he's supposed to be. And he goes out walking, and he sees this beautiful woman named Bathsheba. And the tragic part is that we learn right now that this great king of Israel begins to see people as objects. He sees somebody that will give him pleasure, not as somebody who has any kind of interest to him as a human being at all. He starts to gather some data. Who is this person, this beautiful woman? They say, well, actually she's the daughter of one of your mighty men, Eliam. And he's married to Uriah, who is one of the chief fighters on the front. She is a married woman. Don't mess with her. But David doesn't listen to anybody. He's the king. He orders Bathsheba brought to him, and he orders her to bed. Doesn't see anything particularly human about Bathsheba. Bathsheba, shortly after there, relates to him that she's pregnant. Bad situation for the king. He has been warned not to traverse here, but he went ahead and did it anyway, and now he's got in a little embarrassing situation. So he tries to take care of it. So he orders Uriah back from the front. And he says, go spend time with your wife. Have fun with her. Uriah says, it is customary for those of us in high places in the service not to have any relations with our family while the others are out fighting. That is sacrilege. I won't do it. David is angry, but he figures there must be some other way. Then he discovers what it is. He gives him a letter to take back to Joab, the leader of the army. It is sealed. But what it is sealed with is the death of Uriah. David continues his onslaught on people as if they didn't exist. And in the letter it says, Joab, take and put Uriah on the front of the line and then back off so Uriah will be killed. And that's exactly what is ordered, and that's exactly what he does. He keeps mounting sin upon sin because he doesn't see people as people. That's the problem with us sometimes. And when we get into real trouble, it is because generally we are just not seeing people as people. Nathan the prophet comes to David and he said, David, I've got a problem I want you to solve. You're the wise man. He said, there is one person in the kingdom that has multiple animals, multiple sheep, multiple ewes. And then there is one who just has one. But he looks at it almost as a daughter. He carries it with him all the time. He protects it. And when somebody came to visit the rich man and asked for some meal from a ewe, he took the one from the one who had only had one and sacrificed none of his own. What should we do with this person? David is enraged. Well, let's take this person and kill him. Again, David doesn't look at people at all. He makes rash decisions, and the destruction of one person or another makes no difference to him whatsoever. And Nathan says, you are the man. You are the man. You're the one that had a number of wives, and you went and stole somebody else. And not only that, you that are God's apple, you had her husband killed, so it might absolve you. At that point, David's life starts to unravel. And he unravels simply because he was cold and uncaring, even being the king. We've seen so much of that lately. So many people of significance that ending careers because they just didn't regard people as people, but they looked at people as objects. Harvey Weinstein, Bill O'Reilly, Matt Lauer, Bill Cosby, all names that you know so well. When they treat people as objects, it causes real despair. Many occupations have become aware of the fact that we need to treat people as people. In the advertising world, they are telling the salespeople to know their people first and to understand that they are not selling a product, but they are dealing with a person, and we found out something about the person and what they need and what makes it life better for them, and you sell to that need. You get to know them first because they like to buy from a friend. One of the complaints in the medical world now, from the nurses in particularly, is we no longer really have time for patient care. We are so busy fulfilling certain regulations of the government and spending 85% of our time charting that we really don't spend time with the patient. You have 5 minutes to get into the room, deal with whatever they need, and get out of there and, chart it all, because if you didn't chart it, you didn't do it. There are many patients who have now complained about really not getting the care they needed because they didn't have anybody who really spent any time with them and explained their situation and related to them as a human being rather than the patient. Here, take your pill, all will be well. And all the great writers of medical care say that one of the most important things is the need for human interaction on a very personal level. Employers treat employees as objects. And we are even told in the ministry, don't get too personal with your congregation. Remember, they are members of the church, not really people. Well, they don't state it that way, but that's the way it comes across. There is a marvelous story called The Velveteen Rabbit. In this little nursery, there's a velveteen rabbit that comes in there, and he meets an old resident of the nursery, Skin Horse. And Skin Horse tells him what it means to become real. He tells the Velveteen Rabbit to become real is not something you're born with. It's something that happens to you. When a child loves you for years and years and wants to be with you and takes very good care of you, that's when you become real. One person I know in the ministry was talking to another, and he said, one of the problems in my congregation is that I don't know answers to all the questions they ask me, and it's embarrassing for me not to really know something. To which his friend replied, they don't really care how much you know. They really want to know how much you care. The biblical story of David and Bathsheba is a story about a mighty king, an apple of God's eye, who forgot that people were people and saw them become objects. we ask you not to do the same. Amen.